Okay, I also don't want to stand between you and your dinner. Just a few closing remarks. Key said when she opened the workshop that it all started with Chat and me. Well, that was of course not true. Chat said so already. It was a whole group of people being involved in this one. But since it was mentioned at the beginning, I'm happy to give some closing remarks. It's only temporary because this is the first part of a workshop. The second part of the workshop will continue on the 23rd and the 26th of June in Geneva, and I hope that you will be able to physically join us. If not, then at least virtually. But it will be a pleasure for us to host you in Geneva. Before looking into the way ahead, let me step back and say a few words about how it all started. And I think we are now in the third or fourth phase of the non-tariff measures program. So did you know that we collected non-tariff barriers? So please pay attention to the word non-tariff barriers. We collected already non-tariff barriers data since the 1980s. So we really have a long history of a database. So it was UNCTAD staff reading regulations and then interpreting ourselves, like, is this a barrier or is this a neutral policy? And then we collected the information and we put this all into a database. Then there was a major shift in kind of the shift in the mindset, which was in 2006, when we put in place a group of so-called eminent persons on non-tariff barriers. So it was still called non-tariff barriers. And that was Alan Deardorff, Ann Kruger, so really kind of eminent people that looked into the whole issue of non-tariff barriers or non-tariff measures. And then they said, well, change the name. I mean, that was one of their recommendations, move from non-tariff barriers to non-tariff measures. And they gave us one task after they came up with a definition that you may all have heard, like all policy measures that can have an impact on international trade. And then they said, well, we need a new classification or an update of a classification of non-tariff measures. And that's what you have seen here in one presentation, and you all know this. It was 8 international organizations being involved in this, and I think that was one of the main success also, because World Bank was very active. At the time, IMF was part of this group, FAO, UNIDO, ITC, OECD, World Trade Organization. So it was kind of a broad consensus then on a classification. Which was then widely adopted later on, but that was many years later. It was adopted by the entire UN membership as being the classification for non-tariff measures. So it's an international classification accepted by 196 countries. And with this, there was this major shift in the perception. So we were not looking at this from the non-tariff barriers lenses anymore, but we said, okay, we just look at this as a neutral policy. We don't say anything about the legitimacy or the impact, whether it has a positive or negative impact on trade. We just collect the information. And then we leave it to the researchers, so people like you, to interpret the data and to use the data and to see, does it have a positive impact, does it have a negative impact? So that was a very important shift. And we collected some data. We had some information from Senegal, South Africa, Latin America, a few countries here and there. But then we went into phase 3. I remember when I was visiting Washington here, and we had a workshop together with key, Aditya was there, Chad came on later on board, and we discussed about this database. And then, well, we discovered that really, I mean, we are missing the big fish, because it's mostly about import measures, and if we don't have all the countries that import most of the measures, then we miss out really a large data. So we agreed on what we call top 25 country project. Well, then we found it politically incorrect, so we changed to top 25 traders project. And well, then we really jumped from a coverage of perhaps, I don't know, 50% or so. Now we have covered more than 95% of world trade. So we really have a big coverage now. So that was really a game changer, I think. Now looking ahead, I think there are three areas that we have to pay attention to, and one is the data, the research side, and then how to bring it to the policymakers. So on the data side, now the task, I think, is to maintain this data set, because there are too many data sets which have been started at some point and then not maintained very well. Here, I think it goes without saying here, because we have seen how important the non-tariff measures data are for policy making, because they are responsible for a high cost of trade. On the other hand, they cannot be negotiated away. They are very beneficial. We all want to have safe toys for our kids, so they are there to stay. The data is important, and we have three consumers of the data. One is researchers, one is the policymakers themselves, and one is the traders, because they also use the data, especially in smaller countries and smaller producers. They don't have the means to engage these expensive trade lawyers to find out the trade regulations in the markets they would like to export to. So now we have a bit of a scattered picture still. So we have some countries, like the European Commission or European Union, where we have an updated data sets 4 times per year, so very regular. We have annual data for Latin America. We are moving now to monthly data for Latin America, so very, very up-to-date data. So that's on the good side. On the negative side, you have heard China. 2016 was the latest data we have. So, and other countries are in between this. So clearly, having a bit of a more systematic approach here, like having the big countries every 1 or 2 years updated, and then perhaps smaller countries every 2 to 3 years or so, that would be important. We have done a lot of effort to make this possible. First, we have reduced the costs, because when we started here, we had huge costs to collect this data. I mean, let me give you the example of the United States. It's all mentioned in the Code of Federal Regulation. It's a book. I mean, it's online, of course. It has literally 100,000 pages. And then it makes references to other sources. So like it says something on SPS measure, and then it says, please refer to this table, and then click here, then you end up at the Ministry of Agriculture with some more details. So we had 3 people working a full year on this data set. I mean, and they literally read hundreds of thousands of pages. I mean, you can imagine that the high cost that was involved in this one. So now we have you know, if you collect it the first time, it's a huge effort. If you collect it the second time, you see a lot of errors that you made when you did it the first time, but it's already a little bit easier. And then you really, you know, the costs are reduced from the third time, because then you have in place a methodology here. For some countries, for the European Commission, for example, I mean, we have now, using modern IT technology, reduced the costs by, I don't know, 10 times or so. I mean, we have increased the productivity significantly here. So that's reducing the cost. Second, bringing in the governments. So more and more we try to, I mean, we are successful convincing the government to be involved in this one, and at least to collect the regulations. Maybe then the coding has to be done by experts or so. But we have countries that come to us, like Georgia. They say, we have heard you have this database of non-tariff measures. Why are we not there? And then, you know, we discuss with them, and then they make an effort. They collected the data themselves, and they did the HS coding and so on. So bringing it closer to the governments, because it should not be the case that, you know, World Bank and UNCTAD and other partner agencies do this forever, but ideally it should be done like as a transparency effort by the countries. The third component is IT. So we have developed a data collection tool, as I said, like for the European Commission. I think we have increased the productivity by a factor of 10 or so. We are also looking into artificial intelligence, and I just see CDESH just came into the room. We had already a project with the World Bank that was many years back. I mean, much more progress has been made. Now we all know ChatGPT. So we are looking into kind of using modern technology to ideally do the coding for us, and we just do quality control. So that's on the data side, where I think it's an important component here to maintain the momentum and to keep on collecting these non-tariff measures data. Well, on the research side, I think we have seen today really nice papers that kind of move ahead also the frontier of the data side. It hasn't been so long that we know about all the effects of non-tariff measures. I mean, the tariff agenda also, I mean, it took 60 years or so to understand like what are the elasticities and so on for tariffs, and all this is relatively new for non-tariff measures. But we know non-tariff measures are more important than tariffs. At least the AVEs are higher than tariffs. We know SPS and TBT are normally more important than the other, maybe we can call them non-tariff barriers, the other regulations. We know from firm-level data that small companies are normally disadvantaged, and we have seen now today new evidence with low-cost producers, the differentiation between SPS and TBT. So we know quite a bit. LDCs are disadvantaged. So there was a recent paper, not recent, it has been already a few years, from Alessandro and the co-author, finding that LDCs could increase their exports by 14% if they would only be able to cope with NTMs at the level of other developing countries. I mean, let alone developed countries that find it much easier to cope with this one. And these are highly relevant research questions. So recently we have been approached by the G90 group, that is all LDCs, all African Union countries and the ACP countries. So it's literally, it's the membership of the UN and WTO of the poorer and smaller countries. So they're all in the G90. And they make proposals for the next ministerial conference of the WTO. They want to renegotiate a few elements here. And they approached us on the NTM frontier, and they said, okay, what's the evidence? So they make proposals, and they want to have evidence that backs their proposals. So it's highly relevant. I think we still have many open elements here that we have not really answered. For example, gender, like how does NTM affect gender, the empowerment of women? There is some evidence, but I would say this is still weak. On the environment or climate change side, which is, of course, very, very dominant in the public debate, I would say there is also so far relatively weak evidence. On very specific measures, we have seen this in the example of the presentation from Indonesia, for example, that they say, okay, this port really has an effect. I mean, not importing anymore through this port because they have a requirement that other ports have to be used, has an impact on food prices by so many % or so. I mean, this is kind of really going into the nitty-gritty details of the impact of the specific measures. The whole discussion about regulatory cooperation and so on. So there are still many elements, I think, where research is needed. The third point is impact and bringing this to the policymakers. And here, I think we have already made significant progress. Really, many governments have changed their view of non-tariff measures. I remember when we started this in 2013 or so, we went to some countries, and then they had some regulations, like in books under the table, and they were afraid of showing them to us. If we could convince them, we made a photo and then we had to scan it and so on. But they really thought our non-tariff measures is something bad, and maybe it's not in compliance with their requirements and obligations at the WTO. So I think our kind of efforts to convince them that there is nothing bad about non-tariff measures. I mean, everybody has it. They are important. We want to have them. They are important for food security, health, and environment, and so on. So this has already changed quite a bit in the perception of many countries. So that's good and that's important. I think we have to continue here, and more needs to be done. At both levels. One is at the country level, so the challenges with the specific import measures, and here lies one problem that we have, which is kind of inherent with these non-tariff measures, because they are mostly import measures, 95% or so, but countries are normally, I mean, policymakers are interested in exports. So how do you convince them that they should also look into their into their import measures? I mean, sometimes we use the trick. Then we say, okay, like the competitiveness of the exports depend on your imports. And Key has the last paper, but also other papers have shown that this is really relevant. But it's kind of we always have to go around this, because by nature somehow policymakers are still mercantilists. They are interested in exports. So at the country level, much remains to be done, but also at the global level. And just to mention that there will be a second part of the conference that will be in Geneva, and that will be oriented also to policymakers. So we will have one session which is really made for policymakers. So I invite you to come to the second part of this workshop on the 23rd and 26th of Geneva. And that brings me to the end. And I would just like to use the opportunity here to thank Key really for organizing this meeting. I mean, you have brought a remarkable group of researchers together. I think that was really excellent. Thank you very much, Key, for this. I would also like to thank Anna Goodman. I don't know if she's still here. Can I get that in? Yes, please. And I would like to thank you. I mean, all WTO colleagues who have been, World Bank colleagues who have been working on the frontier and use all the data. So that's really excellent. Okay, Anna, I just wanted to thank you because.
Website, and Yahoo is the one last minute changes to help us run the show.
Yeah, thank you very much. Excellent. Without you, we would not be here today. Okay, thanks all World Bank colleagues, and I would also like to thank my colleague Alessandro, who came with me, and he said he's tired of non-tariff measures. I hope not too tired anytime soon, because he's really excellent in using the data and enlarging the knowledge. Okay, thank you very much.